Pandemic Prayer. This poem had several references that some people may not know. It talked about the fact that we know that the world is harming us and is harmful to us. We have a lot of current evidence for that. So the poem includes these lines: Tulsa tells the tale, and Rosewood confirms it. Those are references to two separate race massacres. The Tulsa race massacre was about 50 years after the official end of the Civil War. So why did it happen? Because Tulsa had become home to what is known as Black Wall Street. It was a prosperous community in Oklahoma that had become famous around the country. It was one of the most successful African-American communities in the United States at that time. Black entrepreneurs had created a community where they could thrive. There were hotels and businesses and nightclubs and banks. This was a community that was thriving, and the white folks there did not like it. So there wasn't much that they could do until an event happened that was not true, as happens in these cases. There was a young man, a young black man, who the white men in town thought had assaulted a white woman. This man had gotten on an elevator, and in those days, the elevators were operated by young women in uniform, sometimes men, who had to open the gates and use all of these contraptions to get people between the floors. The elevators jerked a little bit. He apparently bumped into her. And knowing that he wasn't supposed to have touched a white woman, he ran away when the elevator door opened for him, and she reported that he had assaulted her. So the white men in town ran after him, and then they burned everything down. There were, I think, 800 injuries. There were 183 serious injuries. There are untold hundreds of people who died, and thousands of homes were destroyed, and the community has never recovered. It's 100 years since then, and there are only a couple of people living yet from that time, but that's what that reference is. The other reference is the Rosewood race massacre, which happened 2 years later. So the Tulsa massacre was in 1921. The Rosewood massacre was in 1923, and Rosewood, Florida was a predominantly black town. It was a whistle stop on a railroad. And the same thing happened. There were accusations that a black drifter had assaulted a white woman. So white people came and they burned the whole town down. Some people escaped. Other people died. It was a smaller number that died there. It was a smaller town. And the town just never recovered. It was a mob of several hundred whites who just roamed the countryside, burning all of the structures there. The survivors in the town hid out in the field. They were later evacuated by the train line that ran through there to safer places. They asked the state of Florida for reparations for the loss of land and homes, and actually were given them. Interestingly, very few people heard about what happened in Rosewood because the media decided not to cover it. It just wasn't important enough. And there aren't official documents, unlike with Tulsa. There were not official documents or photos of the destruction of this community. But in the last 25 years, perhaps, I'm trying to remember what I've read. In the last 25 years or so, a number of media outposts doing documentaries or even television shows have used what happened in Rosewood as a reference and a starting point. So those were the references in this pandemic prayer that was really structured to accommodate the kinds of ways that people were feeling about a disease that kept us locked in our homes and away from people, but not necessarily any safer.